A bare bulb swings above the table, not enough to light the room. Just enough to expose the sweat at your hairline, the tremor in your fingers, the tiniest hesitation that might betray you. Across from you sits a man who doesn't need to raise his voice. He simply asks a question. And in this place, in this war, one wrong answer doesn't mean you failed a test. It means you cease to exist. That's the arithmetic of interrogation in occupied Europe. A name, a date, a city, one slip, and you don't walk out. Now imagine you're a woman alone behind enemy lines, trained to lie, trained to endure, trained to disappear. Imagine that everything you are, your history, your accent, the shape of your fear, is being weighed in silence by men who have made a profession out of breaking human beings. And imagine you already know this. They will hurt you. Not because you're guilty, because hurting you is how they find the truth. Her name was Odette Sansom. Later, the world would know her as Odette Churchill. But in the beginning, she was simply Odette. A young mother, a woman with an ordinary life that the war refused to leave untouched. She wasn't born into espionage. She wasn't raised on secrets. She didn't grow up dreaming of codes and false identities. She grew up like millions did, until Europe fractured, until cities fell, until trains carried uniforms instead of families, and the future narrowed into survival. And then came the moment that changed everything. A call for volunteers, not soldiers, not commandos, women. Because a woman could walk the streets and be overlooked. A woman could carry messages and be dismissed as harmless. A woman could pass a checkpoint with the right posture and the right eyes. While men were pulled aside, searched, beaten, shot, the organization was Britain's clandestine arm in the shadows. The Special Operations Executive, the SOE. Their purpose was blunt and terrifying. Set Europe ablaze. Sabotage, resistance, espionage. The kind of work that didn't come with medals in the moment. Only unmarked graves if you were unlucky. Odette stepped forward. Some say she was driven by patriotism, by anger, by the longing to strike back. Some say it was personal. War always is, in the end. But what matters is this. She volunteered knowing she might never return. Training wasn't glamorous. It wasn't like the movies. It was repetition and bruises. It was learning to read faces and lie without blinking. Learning to carry yourself like someone who belonged. Learning how to vanish. They taught her to resist interrogation, not by becoming a statue, but by becoming a storyteller. Because silence can be suspicious. Silence invites pressure. Silence makes them curious. A good lie, though. A good lie gives the enemy something to chew on, something to chase, something that keeps them busy while the real truth stays locked behind your teeth. Odette learned the difference between a lie that collapses and a lie that holds. The first breaks the moment they tug at it. The second has weight. It has detail. It has a heartbeat. And then, one day, training ended. She was given a new name, a new purpose, a new life made of paper and ink, documents, passes, letters with innocent words that meant dangerous things to the right eyes. She was sent into France. Occupied France was not simply a place under foreign rule. It was a pressure cooker. Every street corner had eyes. Every cafe had ears. Every neighbor might be hungry, scared, or paid. The resistance lived between footsteps. They met in whispers and parted like strangers. They trusted codes more than people, because people could be turned. There were radios hidden behind walls, messages sent in bursts to avoid detection. There were couriers, women like Odette, who carried information that could decide whether a train exploded or a village was raided. And the Germans hunted them with patience, not always with bullets first, often with paperwork, with informants, with surveillance, with careful nets that tightened without warning. Odette's job wasn't to fight like a soldier. Her job was to keep men alive who could sabotage bridges, to keep networks connected, to keep the flow of intelligence moving when a single cut line could doom an entire region. It was a war of minutes and murmurs, a war where the bravest act might be to smile at a checkpoint while your papers trembled in your pocket. At first, the work held together. The contacts arrived. The messages landed. The meetings happened in the quiet spaces between routines. But in occupied territory, success is never permanent. It's only borrowed time. Because every transmission leaves a trace. Every rendezvous creates a pattern. Every human being, no matter how brave, has a breaking point. And somewhere in that darkness, someone started talking. Not loudly, not openly, just enough. A name passed, a face remembered. A route watched one extra time. Odette didn't know it yet. But a shadow had begun following the network. The kind of shadow that doesn't rush. The kind that waits until you think you're safe. And soon, in a place where trust was the rarest currency, one question would rise above all others. Who betrayed whom? Because when the net closes, it doesn't take everyone at once. It takes one, then another, and then it takes the one person holding everything together. Odette had walked into France carrying secrets in her mind, but she was about to discover the cruelest truth of all. Sometimes the enemy doesn't need to guess. Sometimes the enemy already knows your name. In occupied France, danger rarely arrived like thunder. It arrived like routine, a familiar street you'd walked a dozen times, a cafe where the same man always sat near the window, a policeman who looked at your papers 1 second longer than yesterday. And then your stomach would tighten. Not because you saw a gun, but because you felt the pattern shift. Odette learned to live by those shifts. She moved through a world that pretended to be normal. Markets open, trams running, couples arguing in doorways. While beneath the surface, everything was wired for betrayal. Posters warned against sabotage. Curfews carved the night into silence. And every day, the German security apparatus refined the same question. Who is not who they claim to be? Her work demanded motion. She carried messages between resistance cells, between safe houses, between men who couldn't be seen together without condemning each other. She traveled under false papers, rehearsing her cover story until it felt like memory. In her head, 2 lives ran side by side. The one she was, and the one she had to be. To outsiders, she was just another woman on the road. To the people who mattered, she was connective tissue, vital, invisible, fragile. And that was the paradox of SOE work. You weren't meant to be remembered. You were meant to function, like a wire in the wall, only noticed when it snapped. The network Odette served, agents, couriers, radio operators, was always one breath from collapse. The Germans hunted clandestine radios with direction-finding vans. They watched train stations, hotels, ration lines. They recruited informants with money, blackmail, or the simplest weapon of all, fear. Resistance wasn't a romantic banner. It was a ledger of risks. Every time Odette met someone, she risked being followed. Every time she stayed the night, she risked the house being watched. Every time she spoke a name, she risked the name becoming a death sentence. So she learned habits that looked like paranoia to ordinary people. She would change routes, glance at reflections, double back, stand still just long enough to see who adjusted. She carried herself with calm because panic drew attention. And attention killed. But no amount of discipline could erase one fact. Human networks are made of humans, and humans can be turned. Some break under torture. Some break before torture ever begins. Some break because they're greedy or lonely or convinced the war is already lost. Sometimes they don't even think of it as betrayal, just survival. Odette did not know who the weak link was. She only knew that the air felt heavier. Meetings that used to happen smoothly became cautious, delayed, rearranged. Contacts started arriving late, or not at all. A message would come through that sounded wrong. Not the words, but the rhythm. The subtle signs of a system under strain. And then, the first disappearance. A man who was supposed to meet her never arrived. Then another. Then, a safe address suddenly became burned. A door that would not open. A knock that felt too loud, too exposed. A rumor traveled through the underground like a cold wind. The Germans were inside the circuit. This was how the net closed in France. Not with tanks, with paperwork, with quiet arrests, with interrogations that turned individuals into leaks. Odette was told to be careful, but be careful is not a plan when the enemy has time. What Odette didn't fully understand yet was that the Germans weren't merely searching for the resistance. They were mapping it. Like a spider that doesn't snatch at the first vibration, but waits until the entire web trembles at once. And now it was trembling. One evening, Odette moved toward a rendezvous point. A simple thing. A meeting, a handoff, a few minutes of normal conversation that would carry war inside it like a hidden blade. She arrived early. She always did. She stood where she was supposed to stand. She looked like she belonged. She watched without looking. She breathed like she had nothing to hide. Then she saw it. Not a soldier, not an obvious patrol. Just a man too still, pretending to wait for someone else. Then another, across the street, shifting his weight in the same slow way men do when they've been told to hold position. And then a third, further back, glancing down the street, then away, like he'd been trained to avoid staring at his prey. Odette's pulse didn't spike. Her mind did. Because the most dangerous moment is not when the trap springs. It's the moment you realize the trap exists. She had a choice. Walk away and risk being followed. Or step forward and see if this was paranoia. And in espionage, paranoia is often the only thing that keeps you alive. Odette turned, not abruptly, not like someone frightened. She moved as though she'd simply remembered an errand. She changed direction, crossed the street, slowed, watched reflections in a shop window. One of the men adjusted, not toward her, with her. That was all the confirmation she needed. The Germans were watching. Maybe not for her, maybe for someone else. But in a hunted network, being near the wrong person is the same as being the right target. Odette could run, yet running would prove guilt. She could vanish, yet vanishing would expose her contacts. She could lead them away, buy time, protect the others. It was a cruel calculus. And Odette chose the option that looked most like surrender. She walked, not fast, not slow, toward a different street, one that pulled the watchers after her like iron filings to a magnet. She became the bait. Because bait is sometimes the only way to save what matters. But as she moved, something else struck her. This felt organized, coordinated, not random suspicion. As if someone had pointed and said, "Follow her," which meant the question was no longer, "Are we being watched?" The question was, who told them exactly where to look? Odette reached a corner, turned again, and felt the net tighten, because now she wasn't just being followed. She was being guided, pushed invisibly toward a place the Germans wanted her to go. Like a shepherd steering an animal toward the slaughterhouse. And somewhere ahead, unseen, waiting like a closed fist, was the moment where her entire war would change. Because the Germans weren't simply hunting the resistance anymore. They were about to take a prize. And Odette, without raising her voice, without drawing a weapon, was walking straight into the trap that would define her legend. A trap where the first question would be asked. And where her answer would have to be perfect. The knock never comes when you expect it. That's the first rule. If danger announced itself properly, people would survive more often. But it doesn't. It arrives folded into normality. Boots on stairs that don't sound urgent, a door opening without violence, a voice that speaks politely before it destroys you. Odette knew she was being steered, not chased. So when the moment came, it felt almost quiet. A street corner. A pause. Then hands. Not rough, not frantic. Closing around her arms with professional certainty. No shouting, no crowd. Just men who already knew how this would end. She did not struggle. Struggling would only confirm what they already believed. She allowed herself to be taken because resistance, at this stage, would help no one. The Germans were efficient that way. They didn't drag her through the streets. They didn't make a spectacle. They simply removed her from the flow of civilian life. Like lifting a stone and exposing what lived beneath it. The first room was plain. A desk, chairs, a smell of paper and tobacco. Interrogation always begins gently. They asked her name. She gave the one she carried on her papers. They asked where she was from. She answered smoothly. They asked why she was traveling. She gave a reason so ordinary it almost bored them. They weren't looking for slips yet. They were listening to her rhythm. Every interrogator knows this truth. People lie in patterns. The voice tightens. The pace changes. The eyes drift. Fear leaks out in tiny ways. Odette gave them none of that. She had practiced this moment 100 times in her head because SOE training was brutally honest. Capture was not a failure. Talking was, and she knew something else too. Silence would not save her, so she spoke carefully. She let them think they were in control. She answered questions just enough to satisfy, but not enough to reveal. She gave them pieces that led nowhere. Half-truths framed by harmless detail. Still, the Germans were patient. They let the first interrogation end without incident. Because the first interrogation isn't about information. It's about setting expectations. Odette was moved to another location. Then another. Each time, the questions repeated with small variations. Dates shifted. Names were nudged. They wanted to see what changed. She made sure nothing did. That consistency worried them. Because a frightened civilian collapses quickly. A trained agent doesn't. Soon the tone changed. The questions sharpened. The smiles vanished. Files appeared on the desk. Thin at first, then thicker. Names she recognized. Places she knew she must never confirm. And then came the accusation. They told her they knew who she was. That she worked for British intelligence. That she was part of a sabotage network. That they had her entire organization mapped. Some of it was a bluff. Some of it wasn't. This is where many people break. Not under pain, but under the illusion that resistance is already pointless. That everyone else has talked. That the truth is already known. Odette listened. And then she did something unexpected. She didn't deny everything. Instead, she redirected. She told them she worked for British intelligence, but not as a field agent. She told them she was important, but not dangerous in the way they thought. And then, she introduced the lie. Not a rushed lie, not a panicked fabrication. A carefully engineered story. One she had prepared for this exact moment. She claimed she was the wife of a senior British officer, deeply connected, deeply valuable. Someone whose execution would not be quiet. Someone whose death would provoke consequences. It was audacious, and that was the point. Small lies invite verification. Big lies force hesitation. The Germans paused. Because if she was telling the truth, killing her would be inconvenient. And inconvenience is something bureaucracies dislike. They challenged her, pressed for proof, tried to shake the story loose. Odette stayed inside it completely. Names matched. Timelines held. Her confidence never wavered. The lie wasn't about details. It was about status. About making herself too useful to dispose of easily. Still, suspicion remained. And suspicion leads to escalation. She was transferred again. This time to men whose job was not to ask, but to extract. The room changed. No desk, no cigarettes, no polite introductions. Just walls designed to absorb sound. They told her they would ask the same questions again. They told her pain would continue until her answers improved, and then they began. The purpose of torture is not truth. It is compliance. It is designed to make your mind betray your body, to make you say anything, to make it stop. Odette felt the first blow and understood immediately. This was not an interrogation meant to end quickly. This was a dismantling. But here's what the interrogators could not see. The lie she had told was not fragile. It was anchored. Every moment of pain reinforced it, because she never tried to escape into new explanations. She never offered alternative stories. She returned, again and again, to the same narrative. Unchanged, uncracked. To them, this looked like stubbornness. To Odette, it was survival. Hours blurred. Time lost meaning. Pain became a language spoken without words. Still, she did not give them what they wanted. Because she understood something essential. If she broke, she wouldn't just die. She would take others with her. And so she held the line. Not as a hero, not as a symbol, but as a woman who understood the cost of one wrong answer. Eventually, the interrogation stopped. Not because she had convinced them, but because she had complicated things. She was no longer just a captured agent. She was a problem. A prisoner who might be important. A woman who might be valuable. A liability to kill without certainty. And in war, uncertainty can save your life. Odette was removed from the interrogation rooms. But she was not freed. She was sent somewhere else. Somewhere colder. Somewhere final. Because the Germans had decided that if they could not break her quickly, they would let time do the work instead. And time, in their camps, was more lethal than any weapon. There is a moment in captivity when pain stops being the worst thing. That moment comes when you realize the pain is deliberate, scheduled, methodical, something that can be repeated tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Odette entered that moment knowing her lie had worked. But only partially. She was alive. And in occupied Europe, being alive after interrogation meant only one thing. They were not finished with you. The Germans did not abandon their questions. They refined them. Instead of asking who, they asked how. Instead of demanding names, they demanded explanations. They returned again and again to her supposed importance, testing whether it would collapse under pressure. And each time, Odette gave them the same thing, consistency, the same story, the same calm, the same refusal to be reshaped by pain. This is the part of espionage we rarely speak about. The long war inside a prison cell. No radios, no allies, no coded messages. Just walls, silence, and men who believe time is on their side. Odette's captors expected her to deteriorate. That's how it usually went. Sleep deprivation, isolation, the calculated removal of dignity, the slow erosion of self until cooperation feels like relief. But Odette understood something most prisoners never had time to learn. The lie was no longer just a story. It had become her identity. She behaved like someone who expected to survive. Someone who believed consequences would follow her death. Someone who knew she mattered. That posture changed everything. Guards hesitated. Officers argued. Files were passed upward instead of downward. Each level of command inherited the same uncertainty. What if she's telling the truth? That single question, unanswered, kept her alive. But hesitation did not mean mercy. The Germans intensified the pressure. They tortured her not only to extract information, but to test the lie. Pain became verification. If she cracked, the story was false. If she held, it demanded further review. And so the lie was beaten, burned, and starved alongside her. Odette endured things that would end most people's resistance. Not because she was immune to pain, but because she gave it nowhere to go. She refused to trade suffering for release. She refused to barter the safety of others for the illusion of relief. She was moved again, away from local prisons, toward something larger. That movement told her the truth. She was being categorized, not as an asset. As a prisoner, too dangerous to release, too complicated to execute. The Germans had a solution for people like that. They called it protective custody. It was a lie of their own. In reality, it meant disappearance. Odette was transported under guard, her body weakened, her future undefined. She did not know where she was going, but she knew the pattern. When prisoners stopped being questioned, they were usually being sorted, and the final sort was rarely survivable. The gates of Ravensbrück did not look dramatic. That was their cruelty. No fanfare, no speeches, just wire, watchtowers, and a system designed to erase people quietly. Ravensbrück was a concentration camp for women, a place built to consume bodies and return nothing but ash and paperwork. Here, the rules were simpler. You were no longer an individual, you were a number. The lie that had protected Odette in interrogation now faced its greatest test. Because camps did not care who you claimed to be. They cared how long you could work, how little food you could survive on, how quickly you could be replaced. Women arrived and vanished. Illness spread. Beatings were routine. Survival depended on randomness, on moments of unexpected kindness, on not being noticed when attention meant punishment. And yet, even here the lie still mattered. Because Odette did not abandon it. She carried herself differently. She spoke when necessary. She held her composure. She behaved like someone who had already survived worse. Other prisoners noticed. In camps, perception can be currency. Someone who looks unbroken becomes a point of reference, a reminder that the system is not omnipotent. Odette shared what she could. Strength, calm, the quiet discipline of someone who refused to let the camp dictate her inner life. She did not know if the war would end. She did not know if anyone remembered her name, but she knew this. The lie had already saved lives, and now, survival itself became the final act of resistance. Because every day she lived was a contradiction of what the camp was built to do. Outside the wire, the war continued. Inside, time stretched, starved, and punished. Odette held on, not to hope, but to purpose. And somewhere beyond the fences, events were unfolding that would decide whether her lie would be discovered, confirmed, or rendered irrelevant by liberation. But liberation, like capture, never arrives when you expect it. It arrives when the system finally collapses under its own weight. And when that moment came, Odette would discover that surviving was only the beginning. Because the true cost of endurance is not measured in scars. It is measured in what you carry with you after the gates open. When liberation finally came, it did not feel like triumph. It felt like confusion. The gates of Ravensbrück did not swing open to applause or music. They opened to silence, to uncertainty, to women too weak to celebrate and too cautious to believe. For many, freedom arrived after the part of them that could imagine it had already died. Odette was still alive. That alone made her an anomaly. The camp had been designed to erase people quietly, efficiently, without witnesses. And yet, she walked out carrying something the system had failed to destroy. Control of her own story. Her lie, the one forged under interrogation, had done its work. It had protected others. It had delayed execution. It had turned certainty into hesitation inside a machine that thrived on certainty. But survival did not restore what had been taken. After the war, Odette learned the full weight of what she had endured. The networks shattered. The names she never gave, the people she protected, some lived, some didn't. Survival is never a clean ledger. The world wanted heroes, medals, photographs, citations written in tidy language. Odette accepted recognition. But she never romanticized what had happened. Because resistance was not bravery frozen in a moment. It was a series of choices made while afraid, in pain, and profoundly alone. She had been tortured. She had been imprisoned. She had been reduced to a number. And yet, she had not surrendered the one thing that mattered most. She had not betrayed. In time, her story became public. She was awarded the George Cross. Her name entered history books, lists of decorated agents, records of wartime courage. But those records can never show the truth. They cannot show the moment when pain tempts you to speak. They cannot show the discipline it takes to repeat the same lie while your body begs you to stop. They cannot show how thin the line is between endurance and collapse. Odette's heroism was not loud. It was sustained, and that is why it matters. Because wars are not won only by generals and armies. They are held together by people who make unrecorded decisions in small rooms. Decisions that never appear on maps, but determine who lives to see peace. There were many like Odette, women whose names never reached medals, couriers who vanished, agents who died without knowing if their silence had meaning, lest we forget them, not as symbols, but as human beings who chose, again and again, not to give the enemy what they wanted most. The war ended, but the lesson remains. Sometimes survival is not about strength. It is about control. Control of your voice. Control of your story. Control of the truth you refuse to surrender, even when everything else is taken. Odette lived the rest of her life knowing what that cost, and knowing that a single, perfectly held lie had altered the fate of others in ways no one could ever fully measure. This is why we remember her, not because she endured pain, but because she understood what mattered more than ending it, and because, in the darkest machinery ever built for human destruction, she made uncertainty her weapon and lived. Next time, we will tell the story of another woman who faced the same machine and chose a different kind of deception to survive. Because history is full of heroes we almost lost, and stories we cannot afford to forget.